Few know who Henry Charles Carey was and what he has done. Although he may not appear in many U.S. history books, Henry Charles Carey was a pioneer in economic thought in the 19th century. In The Harmony of Interests, Carey compares and contrasts the British system of laissez-faire free trade capitalism with the American system of developmental capitalism through tariff protection and government intervention to encourage production. He was not only the chief economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln, but an innovator in America that defined and gave new meaning to American economics. Henry Charles Carey was born in Philadelphia on December 15, 1793. At the tender age of 8 years old, Henry worked as an apprentice to his father, Matthew Carey. Matthew Carey was founder of Carey and Lee, a publishing and bookselling company. At 12 years old, Henry was sent to Baltimore to represent his father in a branch of the business. When he reached the age of 21, Henry was promoted to the rank of traveling salesman for the company and traveled all over the U.S., from New England to the Carolinas. In 1814, he obtained some ownership in the company and then became head of the establishment in 1825. In 1835, as London financiers began to retreat from further U.S. investments, setting the stage for the Panic of 1837, Carey became less active in the firm and devoted himself entirely to the study of economic issues. He wrote 13 octavo volumes, about 3,000 pages of published tracts, and perhaps an equal quantity of newspaper articles, editorials, and correspondence. He retired from business in 1838, almost simultaneously with the appearance of his Principles of Political Economy. It soon became the standard representation of the American school of economic thought. The financial and economic depression which followed the 1837 panic, and his father Matthew's unrelenting advocacy of protection against free trade, persuaded Carey to become an increasingly fierce and vocal opponent of free trade in the 1840s. Carey expressed his new opinion in 1845 in his pamphlet Commercial Associations in France and England, followed in 1848 by his book Past, Present, and Future, which gained extraordinary influence. Carey became a regular contributor to the New York Tribune and became a major correspondent with leading political figures for the economy and finance. Soon, Carey became one of the leading supporters for the struggling Republican Party in the last half of the 1850s. Henry Charles Carey was truly an innovator of American economy, yet he based his economic thought on Adam Smith. He began his career with great reverence to Adam Smith and his theory of laissez-faire, but disagreed greatly with the economists that followed and expounded on this. The British economists Ricardo and Malthus applied their theories to the land with population exceeding the products being produced, and Carey based his on America, a land with seemingly infinite possibilities for resources, yet with a limited labor force.
Carey argued against Malthus on two positions. He disagreed completely with the universality of Malthus's population doctrine. His doctrine did not apply to all regions of the world, but to only a select few, due to environmental conditions having an impact on the reproduction of humans. Therefore, his doctrine is false. His second argument is that population conditions are essentially influenced by man. Thus, man can have control over the course of reproduction, and can direct it towards a more beneficial society.
Wages had to be hiked to encourage work, even though population was increasing, and immigration was always welcome. America also had a different society than Europe, with no classes. Individual freedom was advocated at the time, which also led to a distinction in economic policies. It was because of this that Carey abandoned Adam Smith's theory of laissez-faire for a more national economy. Henry Charles Carey was not always a believer in the protection of trade and business at home. Carey also believed in higher wages. His formula for the economy was that higher wages produce higher capital, that the rate of wages is determined by the ratio of capital to production. In The Harmony of Nature, Carey proposes that there is no inherent opposition, such as that of population against subsistence, landlord against labor, or capital against labor. Carey held that land is really an instrument of production which has been formed by man, and that its value is due to the labor expended on it throughout history. Carey also said that property in the form of land is only a form of invested capital, a quantity of labor or the fruits of labor permanently incorporated with the soil. He proposes that there is harmony between the landlord and his laborer, because higher wages produce higher amounts of food. Where wages were high, profits were high, and where both of these were high, capital and population increased significantly. He also defined capital as anything that has exchangeable value. There is also no distinction between rents, profits, and interests. He differentiates profits from wages, and that profits are paid for the use of things, such as capital, and wages are compensation for the works of man. Although he was still a firm believer in Adam Smith, he still expounded on his beliefs and argued against fellow economists. Carey garnered much of his economic views into The Principles of Social Science. In this compilation of his lifelong works, Carey sought to show that there exists a natural system of economic laws. Carey again rejected the Malthusian doctrine of population and instead believed that the only situation in which the means of subsistence will determine population growth is one in which a given society is not being radically productive. Carey's definition of value is based on labor cost or sacrifice, but it is the cost of reproduction rather than the cost of production that is the cause of value. In using the concept of reproduction value, Carey wanted to emphasize the dynamics of production. As the value of goods falls, the value of man rises. A more efficient tool naturally reduces the value of existing tools of lesser efficiency.
Henry Charles Carey argued his position of value in his work, The Political Economy, using the example of pearls. Pearls are high because they are rare and a scarcity. That scarcity could be translated into the efforts to obtain the units of those pearls. So if one would be so fortunate enough to find a mound of pearls or synthetically reproduce them, then the value of pearls would greatly diminish because its reproduction value would go down.
Carey's interest in the small entrepreneur, particularly the farmer, whom he regarded as the backbone of the nation, may have been the principal motive in his advocacy of a large currency and in his eventual joining of the Greenback Party. The troubles of the debtor class, which was obtaining low prices for its produce following the Civil War, while the capitalist class was enjoying increased purchasing power in the goods of the producer, was a discordant note in Carey's economic harmonies. Carey's exaltation of money as the great instrument of association led him into taking the stand that there could be no such thing as an oversupply of the precious metals. Carey proves the truth of his thesis by arguing that, like ships and roads and bridges, money tends to diminish the obstacles interposed between the producer and the consumer. He also advocated tariff protection and government intervention to encourage production.
Carey's belief in the principle of protection was intended to be a universal application, but it was especially directed to everyday ordeals. Carey's government-protected tariff was designed in order to attract the consumer to the producer. This encouragement was needed to keep out the more powerful manufacturers and to establish a state of economic development amongst the pioneer community. Through the protection of the tariff, the manufacturer will be able to buy his raw materials from the home producer, and in turn, the home producer will then receive full value for his produce. Therefore, both groups benefit from one another.
Henry Charles Carey was also known as the key economic advisor to Lincoln. In March 1865, Carey published a series of letters to the Speaker of the House of Representatives called The Way to Outdo England Without Fighting Her. In these letters, Carey advocated both Lincoln's greenbacks policy of debt-free, government-issued currency and the idea of raising the reserve requirements on private banks up to 50% as a way to free America's economy from that of British capitalists.
Although Carey advocated raising the reserve requirement, doing so in the current economy would stunt the growth of the money supply, thus stifling economic expansion.
Henry Charles Carey's economic thought, although controversial during his time, was a cornerstone of the U.S.'s economic policy of the decades to come. Very few people admired Carey for an objective position in his day. You were either totally against him or totally for him. He influenced many people's minds when it came to promoting the idea of a strong nation that could stand on its own 2 feet economically, without having dependence on nations such as England or France. Henry Charles Carey reformed economics and politics by aiding successive movements which gave rise to the new school of economics and brought economic scholarship and research to grips with the current business scene. He challenged the assumption that the landlord and tenant represented capital and labor had opposing interests, a belief widely accepted by the British School of Economics. Carey's theories of high wages and prosperity also gave hope to nations that were under control of nations experiencing industrial revolutions, like England. They had hope that they could someday stand economically independent.